So, March 1st, and Samsung just announced their new flagship products for the year, the Galaxy S6 and the Galaxy S6 Edge. So, what are they? Well, in terms of specifications, both devices have the 5.1-inch display. Samsung have bumped that up in terms of quality and resolution to 2K display, so that's 1440 by 2160 for you nerds out there. For you non-nerds, it's the same display they've got on the Tab S 8.4 and the Tab S 10.5. And take a look at those screens, they're phenomenal on them. Those are tablets on this phone. They've improved the processor, so this is one of their own Exynos branded processors. It's an octa-core, 2.1 GHz quad-core and a 1.5 GHz quad-core as well. And the way the octa-core processors work is, depending on what your phone is doing, it will associate and activate one of the sets of cores. So if you're just browsing the internet and doing light things, it's the 1.5 GHz quad-core that you use. Or if you're doing gaming, video editing, things like that, you'll use the 2.1 GHz quad-core, depending on which one it is. The idea is you get both power and battery life. So quite good, and that's 64-bit as well. So 64-bit is now compatible, Android is now compatible with 64-bit, excuse me. So that means that everything should be faster, things like that. I won't get into too much detail on that one. 16 megapixel camera with optical image stabilization, which is always really good to see. And it comes in 32 gigabytes, 64 gigabytes, or 128 gigabytes storage size. They also crammed it with 3 gigabytes of RAM as well, and this is DDR4, which is super duper quick. First ever on a phone, so the phone should really scream. The performance on there should be absolutely brilliant with that octa-core processor and that 3 gig of RAM. Okay, in terms of design, this is the big story. Samsung completely nailed it, it seems like. They knocked it out of the park, so they've completely changed it, and it doesn't look any Samsung we've seen before. They were toying around with metal in the Note 4 and the Alphas, but they've just stepped it up a notch with the S6 and the S6 Edge. So it's got Gorilla Glass 4 on the front and the back, and around the middle there's an aluminium frame, so think of it kind of like the iPhone 4 and 4S. It doesn't look like either of those, but you know, you've got the glass, metal, glass sandwich. It's just 7mm thick as well, so it's really quite thin. In terms of camera, they've made a good few changes. So like I say, 16 megapixel OIS, optical image stabilization, so no more shaky images, no more shaky video, it should be all smooth and buttery. It's got a 5 megapixel front-facing camera with a wide-angle lens. You get about 90 degrees in it, so good for selfies, basically, getting lots of people in a selfie. It's got something that's pretty new actually, called tracking autofocus, so if I tap on your face while I'm taking a picture of you, if you move, it will keep the focus on you. You can double tap to launch the camera, and apparently this takes 0.6 seconds, which is incredible. It's really good. And it'll also do auto HDR, so when your phone thinks you need HDR, it turns it on for you, because let's face it, nobody knows how and when to use HDR. Nobody does, so phone's going to do it automatically. So if we compare the S6 and the S6 Edge to the S5, what's the difference? Well, it gains in terms of camera, battery life, screen, etc. But the main three things you need to know is just lose a few things. So, as you might have picked up from earlier, no SD card slot, unfortunately. Also, no removable battery. Lastly, it doesn't seem like it's water resistant or dust resistant either, which for me, no big hassle. They've got the new fingerprint scanner on there as well, so it works a lot more like the iPhone one does, where you can just tap your thumb on there to register it or unlock your phone instead of having to swipe it, which wasn't really ergonomic. So that absolutely makes a lot of sense. And tied into that is Samsung's new Samsung Pay platform. Now obviously this is a direct competitor to Apple's Apple Pay system, but there's a few differences. So both will use NFC to make payments, but Samsung will also use MST as well if NFC isn't available. So MST is a magnetic secure transmission, and Samsung basically bought a company that did this. The upshot of it is that you can, if a device doesn't have an NFC payment system enabled, you can just use the magstripe. So how does it look like when you use the app? Well, it's actually really straightforward. So you take a picture of your card, it loads all the details onto Samsung Pay, and then whenever you need to, you swipe up from the bottom of the phone and a list of your cards come up, tap on the one you want, and then just authenticate it with your thumbprint or your fingerprint. And then you can pay for stuff with it. Nice and simple. We should hopefully see that around winter, maybe early next year. It's going to be launched in Korea and the States around summertime, so we'll be after that, unfortunately. So it seems like it's pretty intuitive. It does seem like it's pretty intuitive. It'd be interesting to see that one in action. Couple of other changes as well is Samsung have decided to strip back TouchWiz. So
the thing about the latest TouchWiz is that it's more customizable. Samsung has thrown in support for user interface themes, and we're about to apply one just to show you what happens. This theme is called Pink, unsurprisingly, and it's one of the many user interface themes that you will be able to download from the Samsung store. To meet the needs of enterprise consumers, Samsung has added Knox, its secure mobile platform. With its help, the user may have two profiles on this device, one for their business needs and one for their personal needs. One feature I cannot demonstrate.
One thing I haven't talked about so far, really, is the difference between the S6 and the S6 Edge. So, the clue's in the name, really. The S6 Edge curves across the edge of the phone. So you've got these round bezels,
these
like
two
you
are very
like
much
have on the
alike.
iPhone 6.
Give or take a
And instead of
millimeter,
the screen
or even
stopping
less, they're
flat,
pretty
so
much
you
the
get a
same, and
rectangle in the
strangely,
middle.
the
It
S6 weighs
tapers off
6
the edge
grams
slightly.
more than
You
its
lock one
edge
of the volume
sibling
buttons on
at
the side,
138
it just goes
grams.
across the edge.
They're also both
From
incredibly
everything
thin at
everybody said that's reviewed it
6.8
held
and
them
7
both,
millimeters
said
for
the
the edge,
S6 Edge is the
respectively.
winner. It's
Samsung
not
also
gimmick,
emphasized
it
the
feels like a
durability
V4
for
kit.
both models,
And,
but we wouldn't
it
advise you
looks
to
it as
drop
well.
a matte.
The S6 and the S6 Edge are identical in terms of specifications, apart from that edge thing. But because that uses a flexible AMOLED screen, expect the Edge to be more expensive. But I think it's going to be more popular as well. I think Samsung are really going to nail it with this one. I think they're going to do very, very, very well. The last thing I want to cover really is the battery. So you've got two types of wireless charging inbuilt into the phone, which is the first phone to ever have that. So it should work with pretty much everything. So it's supported out the box. Your battery capacity has actually decreased since the S5 from 2550 milliamps to 2800. What does that mean? Milliamps is just your battery capacity. How big is your battery? So although it's smaller, they've compensated that with the fact it's got the fast charging on there. So you can get from 10 minutes of charge, you can get 4 hours of use, according to Samsung. But also it charges up twice as quickly as the iPhone 6. So that sounds pretty good, to be fair. If they're going to make that sacrifice, then having those kind of things there is a great way to alleviate some of the issues there. But also think about this, their new processor is apparently about 30% more efficient, along with all the other optimizations with screen and RAM and various other bits and pieces, 64-bit. Apparently the battery life should be a bit better than your S5, or about the same, so you won't notice that much of a hit because of the smaller battery capacity. All in all, Samsung have done a really good job, I think. They've pretty much nailed it, I reckon. There's a lot of buzz about these two devices now, and it's actually exciting to see them completely go, right, do you know what, let's change it all, because the biggest criticism of Samsung for such a long time was the actual quality of the devices, you know, the build, the design of them. It wasn't really up to where everybody else was. It definitely is now. It definitely is now. So they've got all the hardware sorted. The software seems a lot better. Can't wait to get my hands on these things and see for myself how good is it versus everything else that we've got. Launch date is apparently going to be April the 10th. We'll have to see if that gets pushed back or moves around, but April the 10th, so just over a month away.